Hey guys, welcome back. Just a reminder that this is being shared with permission from this is being presented with permission from Scholastic. We're going to start off with our riddle of the day. Yesterday, our riddle of the day was, when things go wrong, what can you always count on? The answer was your fingers. Your riddle of the day for today is, where can you find cities, towns, shops, and streets, but no people? Again, that's, where can you find cities, towns, shops, and streets, but no people? All right, I'm going to leave that there for you guys to think of it. Please remember today we are reading chapters 15 and 16. We're going to start off with chapter 15. It's called Paris. During the daytime, she hid in her room. Going anywhere else was pure torture. The Uglies in her own dorm treated her like a walking disease, and anyone else who recognized her sooner or later asked, "Why aren't you pretty yet?" It was strange. She had been an Ugly for 4 years, but a few extra days had brought home to her exactly what the word really meant. Tally peered into her mirror all day, noticing every flaw, every deformity. Her thin lips pursed with unhappiness. Her hair grew even frizzier because she kept running her fingers through it in frustration. A trio of zits exploded across her forehead, as if marking the days since her 16th birthday. Her watery, too small eyes glared back at her, full of anger. Only at night could she escape from the tiny room, the nervous stares, her own ugly face. She fooled the minders and climbed out as usual, but she didn't feel much like any real tricks. There was no one to visit, no one to play a prank on, and the idea of crossing the river was too painful to consider. She had gotten a new hoverboard and tricked it up like Shay had taught her, so at least she could fly at night. But flying didn't feel the same. She was alone. It was getting cold at night, and no matter how fast she flew, Tally was trapped, and she knew it. The fourth night in ugly exile, she took her board up to the green belt, staying at the edge of town. She whipped it back and forth, past the dark columns of tree trunks, shooting through them at top speed, so that her hands and face collected dozens of scratches from the branches flaring by. After a few hours of flying had worn away some of her anguish. Then Tally had a happy realization. This was the best she'd ever ridden. Almost as good as Shay now. Never once did the board dump her for getting too close to a tree, and her shoes held on to its grippy surface, like they were glued there. She worked up a sweat even in the autumn chill, riding until her legs were tired, her ankles aching, her arms sore from being spread out like wings, guiding her through the dark forest. If she rode this hard all night, Tally thought, maybe tomorrow she could sleep the hideous daylight away. She flew until exhaustion forced her home. When she crawled back into her room at dawn, someone was waiting there. Paris! His features burst into a radiant smile, big eyes flashing beautifully in the early light. But when he looked closer, his expression changed. What happened to your face, Squint? Tally blinked. Haven't you heard? They didn't do the... Not that. Paris reached up and touched her cheek, which smarted under his fingertips. You look like you've been juggling cats all night. Oh, yeah. Tally ran her fingers through her hair and rummaged through a drawer. She pulled a med spray out, closed her eyes, and squirted herself in the face. Ow! She yelped in the few seconds before the anesthetics kicked in. She sprayed her scratches on her hands as well. Just a little midnight hoverboarding. A little past midnight, don't you think? Out of the window the sun was just beginning to turn the towers of New Prettytown pink. Cat vomit pink. She looked at Paris, exhausted and confused. How long have you been here? He shifted uncomfortably in her window chair. Long enough. Sorry, I didn't know you were coming. He raised his eyebrows in beautiful anguish. Of course I came. The moment I figured out where you were, I came. Tally turned away, unlacing her grippy shoes as she collected herself. She'd felt so abandoned since her birthday. It had never occurred to her that Paris would want to see her, especially not here in Uglyville. But here he was, worried, anxious, lovely. It's good to see you, she said, feeling tears come into her eyes. They were red and puffy most of the time these days. He beamed up at her. You too. The thought of what she must look like was too much. Tally collapsed onto the bed, covering her face with her hands and sobbing. Paris sat next to her and held her for a while as she cried, then wiped her nose and sat her up. Look at you, Tally Youngblood. She shook her head. Please don't. You're an absolute mess. Paris found a brush and ran it through her hair. She couldn't meet his eyes and stared at the floor. So, why do you always go hoverboarding in a blender? So do you always go hoverboarding in a blender? She shook her head and lightly touched the scratches on her face. Just tree branches, at high speed. Oh, so getting yourself killed is your next brilliant trick. I guess you would just about top your current one. My current what? Paris rolled his eyes. This whole trick where you haven't turned pretty yet. Very mysterious. Yeah, some trick. So when did you get modest, Squint? All of my friends are fascinated. She turned her puffy eyes to her friend, trying to figure out if he was kidding. I mean, I already told everyone that you're after the fire alarm thing, but now they're really dying to meet you, he continued. There's even a rumor that special circumstances is involved. Callie blinked. Paris was serious. Well, that's true, she said. They're the reason I'm still ugly. Paris's big eyes widened even more. Really? That is so bubbly. She sat up and frowned. Did everyone know about them but me? Well, I had no idea what anyone was talking about. Apparently, specials are like gremlins. You blame them any time, and you blame them when anything weird happens. Some people think they're totally bogus, but no one I know has ever actually seen a special. Callie sighed. Just my luck, I guess. So they're real? Harris lowered his voice to a whisper. Do they really look different? You know, not pretty? Well, not that they're not pretty, Paris, but they're really. Callie looked at him, gorgeous and hanging on every word. It felt so perfect to be sitting next to him, talking and touching as if they'd never been apart. She smiled. They're just not as pretty as you. He laughed. You'll have to tell me all about it. But don't you dare tell anyone else. Not yet. Everyone's going to be so intrigued. We can throw a big party when you get yourself prettied up. She tried to smile. Paris, I know you're probably not supposed to talk about it, but once you're across the river, just drop a few hints about special you know what, and you'll get invited to all the parties. Just make sure you take me with you. He leaned closer. There's even a rumor that all the bubbly jobs go to people who had tricky records as kids. But that's years from now. The main thing is to get you pretty already. But Paris, she said, her stomach starting to hurt. I don't think you'll love it, Tally. Being pretty is the best thing ever. And I'll enjoy it about a million times more once you're there with me. I can't. He frowned. Can't what? Tally looked up at Paris, clutching his hand. You see, they want me to tattle on a friend of mine, someone I got to know really well after you left. Tattle? Don't tell me this is all about some ugly trick. Sort of. So tattle away. How big a deal can it be? Tally turned away. It's important, Paris. It's more than a trick. I made my friend a promise that I'd keep a secret for her. His eyes narrowed, and for a moment he looked like the old Paris. Serious, thoughtful, even a little bit unhappy. Tally, you made me a promise, too. She swallowed and stared back at him. His eyes shone with tears. You promised you wouldn't do anything stupid, Tally. That you'd be with me soon. That we'd be pretty together. She touched the scar on her palm, still there, even though Paris's had been rubbed away. He reached over and held her hand. Best friends forever, Tally. She knew that if she looked into his eyes again, it would be all over. One glance and her resistance would evaporate. Best friends forever, she said. Forever. She took a deep breath and let herself stare into his eyes. He looked so sad, so vulnerable and wounded, so perfect. Tally imagined herself by his side, just as beautiful, spending every day doing nothing but talking and laughing and having fun. You'll keep your promise, Tally? A shudder of exhaustion and relief went through her. She had it now, an excuse to break her vow. She had made that promise to Paris, just as real, before she'd ever met Shay. She'd known him for years, and Shay only a few months, and Paris was right here, not out in some strange wilderness, and was looking at her with those eyes. Of course. Really? He smiled, and it was as bright as the daybreak outside. Yeah, the words came out so easily. I'll be there as soon as I can, I promise. He sighed and hugged her tight, rocking her softly. Tears rose up in her again. Paris finally released her and looked out at the sunny day. I should go. He waved at the door. You know, before the thingies all wake up. Of course. It's almost past my bedtime, and you've got a big day ahead of you. Callie nodded. She'd never felt so exhausted. Her muscles ached, and her face and hands had started stinging again, but she was overwhelmed with relief. This nightmare that had begun 3 months ago, when Paris went across the river, and it would soon end. Okay, Paris, I'll see you soon as possible. He hugged her again, kissed her salty scratched cheeks, and whispered, "Maybe in a couple of days? I'm so excited." He said goodbye and left, checking both ways down the corridor before departing. Callie looked out the window for another glance at Paris, and realized that a hover car was waiting for him below. Pretties really did get whatever they wanted. Callie wanted nothing more than to fall asleep, but acting on her decision couldn't wait. She knew that with Paris gone, the doubts would come back again and haunt her. She couldn't stand another day like this, not knowing if ugly purgatory would ever end. And she'd promised Paris that she'd be with him as soon as possible. "I'm sorry, Shay," Callie said quietly. Then she picked up her interface ring from where it had lain on the bedside table all night and slipped it on. "Message to Dr. Cable, or whomever," she said to it. "I'll do what you want, just let me sleep for a while." Message over. Callie sighed and let herself fall back onto her bed. She knew she should spray her scratches again before passing out, but the thought of moving made her whole body ache. A few dozen scratches wouldn't keep her from sleeping today. Nothing would. Seconds later the room spoke, reply from Dr. Cable. "A car will be sent for you, arriving in 20 minutes. "No," she mumbled, but realized it would be useless to argue. Special circumstances would come. They would wake her up. They would take her. Callie decided to try for a few minutes of sleep. It would be better than nothing. But for the next 20 minutes, she never once shut her eyes. Next chapter is called Infiltrator. The cruel pretty seemed even more unearthly to exhausted eyes. Callie felt like a mouse in a cage full of hawks, just waiting for one to swoop down and take her. The trip in the hover car had been even more sickening this time. She focused on the nausea eating away at her stomach, trying to forget why she was here. As Callie and her escort made their way down the hall, she tried to pull herself together, tucking in her shirt and tugging at her hair. Dr. Cable certainly didn't look like she'd just gotten up. Callie tried without success to imagine what a tousled Dr. Cable would look like. Her darting metal gray eyes hardly seemed as if they would ever close long enough to sleep. "So, Callie, you've reconsidered?" "Yes." "And you'll answer all our questions now, honestly, and on your own free will?" Callie snorted. "You're not giving me a choice." Dr. Cable smiled. "We always have choices, Callie. You've made yours." "Great, thanks. Look, just ask your questions." "Certainly. First of all, what on earth happened to your face?" Callie sighed, one hand touching the scratches. "Trees." "Trees?" Dr. Cable raised an eyebrow. "Very well. On to a more important subject. What did you and Shay talk about the last time you saw her?" Callie closed her eyes. This was it, the moment where she would break her vow to Shay. But a small voice in her exhausted brain reminded her that she was also keeping a promise. Now she could finally join Paris. She talked about going away, running away with someone called David. Ah, yes, the mysterious David. Dr. Cable leaned back. "And did she say where she and David were going?" "A place called the Smoke, like a city, only smaller. And no one was in charge there, and no one was pretty." "And did she say where it was?" "No, she didn't. Not really." Callie sighed and pulled Shay's crumpled note from her pocket. "But she left me these directions." Dr. Cable didn't even look at the note. Instead, she pushed a piece of paper from her side of the desk over to Tally's. Through bleary eyes, Tally saw that it was a 3D copy of the note. Perfect, perfect, down to the slight incisions of Shay's labored penmanship on the paper. "We took the liberty of making a copy of that the first time you were here." Tally glared at Dr. Cable, realizing she'd been duped. "Then why do you need me? I don't know anything more than what I just said, and I didn't ask her any more. I didn't go with her because I just wanted to be pretty." A lump rose in her throat, but Tally decided that under no circumstances, special or not, was she going to cry in front of Dr. Cable. "I'm afraid that we find the instructions on the note rather cryptic, Tally. You and me both." Dr. Cable's hawk eyes narrowed. "They seem to be designed to be read by someone who knows Shay quite well. By you, perhaps?" "Yeah, well, I get some of it, but after the first couple of lines I'm lost. I'm sure it's still very difficult, especially after a long night of trees. I still think you can help us, however." Dr. Cable opened a small briefcase on the desk between them. Tally's tired brain struggled to make sense of the objects in the case. A fire starter, a crumpled sleeping bag. "Hey, that's like the survival stuff that Shay had." "That's right, Tally. These ranger kits go missing every so often. Usually just about the same time that one of our uglies disappears." "Well, mystery solved. Shay was all ready to travel to the Smoke with a bunch of that stuff. What else did she have?" Tally shrugged. "A hoverboard, a special one, with solar." "Of course, a hoverboard. What is it about these things and miscreants? And what did Shay plan to eat, do you suppose?" She had food in packets, dehydrated. Like this? Dr. Cable produced a silvery food packet. Yeah, she had enough for 4 weeks. Tally took a deep breath. 2 weeks, if I'd gone along. More than enough, she said. 2 weeks? Not so very far. Dr. Cable pulled a black knapsack from beside her desk and started to pack various objects into it. You might just make it. Make it? Make what? The trip to the smoke. Me? Tally, only you understand these directions. I told you, I don't know what they mean. But you will, once you're on the journey, and if you're properly motivated. But I already told you everything you wanted to know. I gave you the note. You promised. Dr. Cable shook her head. My promise, Tally, was that you wouldn't be pretty until you helped us to the very, very best of your abilities. I have every confidence that this is within your ability. But why me? Listen carefully, Tally. Do you really think that this is the first time we've been told about David, or the smoke, or found some scrawled directions about how to get there? Tally flinched at the razor blade voice, turning away from the anger on the woman's cruel face. I don't know. We've seen all this before, but whenever we go out ourselves, we find nothing. Smoke indeed. The lump had returned to Tally's throat. So how am I supposed to find anything? Dr. Cable pulled the copy of Shay's note towards herself. This last line, where it says to wait on the bald head, clearly refers to a rendezvous point. You go there, you wait. Sooner or later, they'll pick you up. If I send a hover car full of specials, your friends will be a bit suspicious. You mean you want me to go alone? Dr. Cable took a deep breath, a disgusted look on her face. This isn't very complicated, Tally. You've had a change of heart. You decided to run away following your friend Shay. Just another ugly escaping the tyranny of beauty. Tally looked at the cruel face through the prism of gathering tears. And then what? Dr. Cable pulled another object from the briefcase, a necklace with a little heart pendant. She pressed on its side and the heart clicked open. Look inside. Tally held the tiny heart up to her eye. I can't see anything. Ow! The pendant had flashed, blinding her for a moment. The heart made a little beep. The finder will only respond to your eye print, Tally. Once it's activated, we'll be there within a few hours. We can travel very quickly. Cable dropped the necklace onto the desk. But don't activate it until you're in the smoke. This has taken us some time to set up. I want the real thing, Tally. Tally blinked away the after image of the flash, trying to force her exhausted brain to think. She realized now that this had never been a simple matter of answering questions. They had always wanted her as a spy, an infiltrator. She wondered just how long this had been planned. How many times had special circumstances tried to get an ugly to work for them before? I can't do this. You can, Tally. You must. Think of it as an adventure. Please, I've never even spent the whole night outside the city. Not alone. Dr. Cable ignored the sob that had cut through Tally's words. If you don't agree right now, I'll find someone else, and you'll be ugly forever. Tally looked up, trying to see through the tears that were flowing freely now, to peer past Dr. Cable's cruel mask and find the truth. It was there in her dull metal gray eyes, a cold, terrible surety, unlike anything a normal pretty could ever convey. Tally realized that the woman meant what she said. Either Tally infiltrated the smoke and betrayed Shay, or she'd be ugly for life. I have to think. Your story will be that you ran away the night before your birthday, Dr. Cable said. That means you've already got to make up for 4 lost days. Any more delays, and they won't believe you. They'll guess what happened. So decide now. I can't. I'm too tired. Dr. Cable pointed at the wall screen, and an image appeared. Like a mirror, but in close up, it showed Tally as she looked right now, puffy-eyed and disheveled, exhausted, and red scratches marking her face, her hair sticking out in all directions, her expression turning horrified as she beheld her own appearance. That's you, Tally, forever. Turn it off! Decide. Okay, I'll do it. Turn it off. The wall screen went dark. All right, and that's actually not only the end of our chapter for today, but it's also the end of part 1. When we tune in tomorrow, we will be starting part 2, the smoke. Have a great day.